The way boards have been traditionally studied is people look at annual reports, or they try and classify people, independent, not independent, etc. But at the end of the day, what governance is about are the decisions people are making, the behaviour of people. And we know that the behaviour of people can vary from what we think that they might do. So for us, I think it's really important to understand what are people actually doing in the boardroom, and what can we learn from that, and how can we make the governance of our corporations and organisations better.
The thing that really interests me about, I guess, working within this environment and looking at board behavior is the fact that we're kind of taking a different approach than previous research. Because if you look at previous work, what it's really done is looked at the outcomes of board processes and just seen if, I guess, a certain characteristics of the board has an association with performance. Whereas what we're doing here is really looking at the board processes in themselves and kind of opening up the black box to see what is actually going on.
I think that the most intriguing element in studying boards is the idea that we are moving away from the classical approaches that look at how boards are structured and demography, and there's clear evidence from studies in groups that actually we should look for what is the alchemy in the boards, what's the clicker that makes groups work effectively. And we should always remember that actually boards of directors are a group of people working together towards one objective. And I think that what intrigues me is understanding what are the interactions and communication patterns that we see developing in the board, and that ultimately lead to higher board effectiveness.
What I find very intriguing in the corporate governance area is that you have had all these boards composed of very capable directors, but somehow they failed to be effective as a group, and we all know the famous corporate governance scandals as a result. And what I'm trying to understand here is sort of what makes group effective, how directors can interact in an effective way and have an impact.
The idea behind this is that as well as the words that we use and what's encapsulated in the words, it's how we say it, how we move, that communicates to people, and that often those movements can actually be as important, if not more important, than the words. So if it gets down to movement and the use of voice, then we've got technology, you know, the average technology you'd find in your mobile phone that can record objectively measures of those aspects of your behaviour. So if you've got your mobile phone, it will have an accelerometer in it, and that can measure movement. And not only that, it measures movement in 3 planes. So if you have an accelerometer in a sensor and you move forward, it can tell that you've moved forward, that you've leaned into the conversation. So the idea is that with basically the technology that's in your mobile phone, put in a format that you can wear, you can measure movements, and it's how those movements come together, the cluster of those movements, give you an indication as to how someone's communicating, how they're behaving.
At the moment, I'm involved in a big project in which we study the chair of the board, and we all know that chairs are important and can have a huge impact on boards. But what we don't know is which behaviors of the chair during a meeting really impact performance. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at all sorts of behaviors, like the chair structuring the meeting, making jokes, interacting with other directors, giving people the floor, and I'm sort of trying to understand which of those behaviors really have an impact and really matter.
A project I'm currently working on with the Behavioural Group is actually looking at how communication patterns make boards more effective. Actually, we know that there are some markers and indicators when we observe how boards of directors interact that are basically very good predictors of the quality of the discussion and quality of the outcome. So we're using some new technologies to map as objectively as we can what's going on in a board and actually, hopefully, come up with some predictive models of what makes a board more effective.
One of the big debates that we have within the corporate world today is to do with board diversity. So one of my projects that I'm working on right now has to do with, do directors actually consider gender when they appoint new, board members? Because if we look at, society and the programs that we have in place to try and encourage, more women on boards, they're really to do with trying to, increase the skills of women or try to increase their networks. But if we actually look from the other side and look at how they're actually appointed by current directors, then perhaps it is actually their current subtle gender bias that might actually be influencing the current low levels of females on the board.